Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
I never imagined that the afternoon sun filtering through the lace curtains of my kitchen window in our modest suburban home in Dayton, Ohio, would cast such a harsh light on the moment when my own son Mark walked through the door with that unyielding expression on his face, announcing without preamble or consideration for the life I had built single-handedly after his father's untimely death from a heart attack when Mark was barely a teenager, that his wife Lisa, their two young children Emma and Jake, and even her overbearing mother Dolores, would all be moving into my house starting next week, declaring firmly that I had no say in the matter, as if the equity I had poured into mortgage payments from two grueling jobs over the decades meant nothing more than a temporary inconvenience to his family's latest crisis. The air in the room seemed to thicken immediately with the weight of his words, carrying the faint scent of the roast I had just pulled from the oven for my solitary dinner, now cooling forgotten on the counter while I stood there in my apron, dish rag still clutched in my hand, feeling the suds drip slowly onto the worn linoleum floor that I had scrubbed meticulously that very morning to maintain the sense of order in a life that had long revolved around supporting him through every setback, from his dropped college dreams to the faltering auto repair shop he had insisted would secure our future despite the mounting debts I had quietly helped shoulder. Mark's eyes, so much like his father's in their determined set, avoided meeting mine directly as he elaborated on the necessity of this arrangement, explaining how Lisa's mother's health issues demanded ground floor access and how the children's current apartment lacked the stability of the school district here, all delivered in a tone that brooked no argument, as though the house I had refinanced twice to fund his education and early business ventures was merely an extension of his own property rather than the sanctuary I had preserved through years of widowhood's isolation and financial scrimping. Lisa lingered awkwardly behind him in the doorway, her arms wrapped protectively around Emma and Jake, who fidgeted with the hem of her skirt, their small faces smeared with remnants of whatever drive-through meal they had grabbed on the way over. And I could see the flicker of discomfort in her expression, perhaps a silent acknowledgement that this bold claim on my space disregarded the quiet sacrifices I had made, like the late nights stitching clothes for neighbors to make ends meet, or the way I had skipped vacations to ensure the roof stayed patched and the basement dry during Ohio's relentless winters. Yet Mark pressed on undeterred, outlining logistics with the efficiency of someone closing a deal at his shop, mentioning how Dolores would claim the guest room with its easy access to the bathroom and how the children could convert his old bedroom into a shared play area filled with the toys already cluttering their current cramped living space, his voice gaining confidence from the assumption that my history of enabling his independence, co-signing loans, offering emotional refuge during his divorces and business slumps, would extend to this ultimate imposition without resistance. I opened my mouth to voice the protest rising in my chest, to remind him that this two-story colonial with its creaking stairs and maple-shaded yard represented not just bricks and mortar, but the culmination of my resilience after losing my husband, the man whose life insurance had barely covered the funeral, let alone the future we had planned together. But the words caught in my throat, tangled with the guilt of past choices where I had prioritized his needs over my own solitude, wondering, even then, if those listening to this tale might judge me harshly for having fostered such entitlement through years of unwavering support that blurred the lines between parental love and reluctant subsidy. Without waiting for my response or offering even a token gesture of negotiation, Mark gave a curt nod as if the decision were irrevocably sealed, then turned on his heel to shepherd his family back out to their dented SUV parked haphazardly in the driveway, the engine coughing to life with a familiar rattle that spoke volumes about the deferred maintenance he always blamed on tight budgets rather than poor planning, their taillights disappearing down the tree-lined street where autumn leaves were just beginning to turn shades of amber and red against the fading daylight. I sank slowly into the wooden chair at the kitchen table, the one scarred from countless family meals and homework sessions under the warm glow of the pendant light, feeling a slow-burning resolve ignite amid the shock. replaying his dismissive pat on my shoulder and the casual finality of "you don't get a say," which echoed like a betrayal from the boy I had raised to value fairness and gratitude, now transformed into a man who viewed my home as collateral for his unraveling circumstances. The house around me, with its walls adorned by faded photos of holidays and achievements, Mark's high school graduation, his wedding to Lisa under a spring sky, suddenly felt both oppressively familiar and vulnerably exposed, prompting me to rise after a time and pace the rooms, noting the empty spaces where laughter had once filled the air but now amplified the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Whether this intrusion would erode the independence I had fiercely guarded in my early 60s or force a reckoning that might finally assert the boundaries I had neglected for too long. That evening, as twilight deepened into night and the neighborhood quieted with the distant hum of traffic on the interstate, I retrieved my phone from the charger on the side table. My fingers trembling slightly, not from fear but from the electric surge of determination that had been simmering beneath the surface, and dialed the number of Sarah, the real estate agent I had met casually at the local market a few weeks prior while browsing for fresh produce to sustain my simple routines. Her voice came through bright and professional when she answered, undimmed by the late hour, and I launched into a request for details on selling the property swiftly, describing the layout with its 3 bedrooms, updated kitchen from a decade ago, and the backyard that backed onto a wooded lot perfect for families seeking escape from urban sprawl, all while she interjected with insights on the current market where homes like mine commanded premium prices amid rising interest rates and a surge in remote workers relocating to affordable Midwest enclaves. We conversed for nearly half an hour, her enthusiasm for comparable sales and staging tips cutting through my lingering hesitations like a clarifying breeze, and by the end of the call, I had committed to a preliminary walk through the following afternoon. The secret of this potential transaction forming a shield against the vulnerability Mark's ultimatum had exposed, even as doubts whispered about the impact on the grandchildren who deserved stability more than adult squabbles. To temper the intensity of that resolve, I allowed myself a small act of defiance later that night, snapping a photograph of the cookie jar on the shelf filled with the last batch of oatmeal raisins I had baked from a family recipe passed down from my mother, then sending it to Mark with a message noting that the treats awaited the children's arrival in their new home, only to consume every one myself while pouring a modest glass of Merlot from the bottle, gathering dust in the pantry, the tangy sweetness and subtle warmth bringing a wry smile to my lips as I imagined his reaction to this petty reclamation of agency in a day that had stripped so much away. Yet as I ascended to the attic under the beam of a single bulb that cast flickering shadows across stored memories, boxes of holiday decorations and his childhood drawings, the satisfaction mingled with a deepening sense of impending confrontation. The air heavy with dust motes dancing like unresolved questions, and it was in that contemplative quiet that headlights pierced the window below, accompanied by the crunch of tires on gravel, signaling an unexpected return that halted my thoughts midstream and left me frozen on the ladder, wondering if my budding plan had already unraveled before it could take root. Those unexpected headlights sweeping across the front window turned out to belong to Mark's familiar SUV pulling back into the driveway far sooner than I had anticipated after his earlier departure with the family, the engine idling roughly as if mirroring the unresolved tension from our confrontation, and I descended the attic stairs with deliberate slowness, setting the box of old trophies aside in the shadowed hallway while composing my features into a mask of casual surprise to mask the quickened pulse that betrayed my secret deliberations with Sarah about transforming this house from a family anchor into a financial lifeline for my own uncertain future. He entered through the back door without knocking again, this time carrying a stack of greasy pizza boxes that wafted the aroma of pepperoni and cheese through the kitchen, a transparent attempt to smooth over the raw edges of his ultimatum with the comfort of shared food from our neighborhood joint where we had celebrated his Little League wins years ago, and as he placed them on the counter with a forced grin, avoiding direct eye contact while muttering something about figuring I might be too upset to cook, I nodded along to his overture. pulling plates from the cabinet with hands steadier than my thoughts, which raced through the implications of his premature return, wondering if guilt or suspicion had drawn him back so quickly after leaving me to stew in the solitude he had so casually upended. We settled at the table under the soft glow of the overhead light, the steam rising from the slices as he dove into explanations laced with justifications for the impending invasion, detailing how Dolores's hip replacement recovery required the flat layout here rather than their steep apartment stairs, and how the children's current school overcrowding would ease in this district with its solid reputation for preparing kids for college scholarships. All while I chewed methodically on a piece of crust that tasted more like cardboard than the nostalgia it evoked from simpler times when meals like this bridged our gaps without the undercurrent of entitlement that now tainted every word. As his monologue unfolded with increasing fervor, my gaze drifted involuntarily to the cluttered mail basket on the counter that I had overlooked in the initial shock of his announcement. And there, amid the assortment of utility bills and junk flyers advertising local hardware sales, a crisp envelope caught my eye with the bank's logo emblazoned in stern blue ink. Addressed to Mark's auto repair business and bearing red-inked warnings of overdue payments that screamed final notices in a way that confirmed the nagging suspicions I had harbored about his shop's viability, despite his assurances during our sporadic phone check-ins that things were turning around after the economic dips following the recent election cycles. I said nothing aloud, merely excusing myself briefly under the pretense of fetching napkins from the drawer to slip the envelope into the pocket of my slacks, the paper crinkling softly against the fabric like a whispered accusation that illuminated the true desperation fueling his bold claim on my home, transforming what I had initially perceived as mere familial overreach into a calculated maneuver to leverage my stability against his mounting liabilities, including perhaps that very loan I had co-signed a decade earlier when he promised it would be his ticket to independence rather than a chain binding us both in financial quicksand. Returning to the table, I resumed my role in the conversation with noncommittal hums and nods, allowing him to ramble on about dividing closet spaces and installing child-proof locks, as if the house were already partitioned into their domains. While inwardly I marveled at the irony of how my past choices to bail him out, covering unexpected shop expenses or absorbing emotional fallout from his marital strains, had inadvertently cultivated this audacious expectation, a pattern that might strike those reflecting on similar family dynamics as a cautionary tale of love morphing into liability without firm boundaries. The meal dragged on in fits of awkward pauses broken by his phone notifications buzzing incessantly, each one pulling his attention away as he scrolled through messages that he dismissed vaguely as client inquiries, though the furrow in his brow suggested otherwise. And I seized a moment when he stepped outside to take a call to examine the envelope more closely in the dim light of the pantry, its contents revealing a balance far steeper than I had imagined, tied to suppliers and equipment. Leases that painted a picture of chronic mismanagement hidden behind his veneer of optimism, prompting a wry internal chuckle at the thought of his grand relocation scheme resembling less a family reunion and more a frantic salvage operation from the wreckage of poor decisions. Emboldened by this discovery, I injected a touch of levity into the evening as we cleared the plates, quipping about how the house might require reinforcements like reinforced fridge doors to withstand the onslaught of growing appetites and snack raids, a comment that elicited a brief laugh from him but carried an underlayer of sarcasm born from the light frustration bubbling within me at the sheer gall of repurposing my sanctuary as a buffer against his self-inflicted storms. Over the subsequent days, this newfound knowledge fueled a subtle shift in my demeanor during his frequent drop-ins, where he arrived with armloads of belongings. Plastic bins of children's clothing spilling toys onto the garage floor and Lisa trailing with measurements for what she called practical updates to the outdated fixtures I had maintained frugally for years, while I assisted superficially, stacking items with feigned enthusiasm that masked my growing resolve to consult Sarah further on accelerating the listing process amid the hot market for properties offering quick possession to relocating professionals. Sarah proved an invaluable sounding board during our clandestine meetings at a quiet diner on the edge of town, Her sharp insights into staging techniques and buyer demographics, families much like Mark's, but with stable incomes seeking the very equity I had built. Mingling with her anecdotes about other widows reclaiming their narratives through bold sales, which resonated deeply with my situation and steeled me against the guilt that surfaced whenever Emma and Jake visited briefly. There. Innocent drawings taped to the fridge evoking memories of nurturing them through Mark's absences at the shop. Yet the real test of my restraint came that Saturday when Mark proposed a celebratory dinner to mark the move-in countdown, assuming my compliance, and I countered with a micro-revenge disguised as oversight by forgetting to cancel a long-standing commitment to the community potluck organized by our neighbor Marge, the quintessential busybody whose garden parties doubled as information exchanges on local happenings, inviting him along under the guise of neighborly integration only to watch as she cornered him with probing questions about the auto industry's woes and rumors of shop closures circulating through the grapevine. Her relentless curiosity forcing him to deflect with strained smiles while I circulated with a plate of deviled eggs, deriving quiet satisfaction from the way this orchestrated discomfort sowed seeds of unease without direct confrontation. He endured it for an hour before excusing us early, his mood soured as we drove back in silence, and later that night, as I sorted through more mail in the solitude of my bedroom with the window cracked to let in the cool autumn breeze, the envelope's revelations lingering like a shadow, I heard his truck idling outside once more, the dashboard light illuminating his profile as he argued heatedly into his phone, gestures animated in a way that suggested the cracks in his facade were widening faster than he could contain them, leaving me to peer through the blinds with bated breath, uncertain if this glimpse into his unraveling would accelerate my plans or draw him perilously close to uncovering my own concealed maneuvers. That prolonged idling of Mark's truck outside my window persisted for what felt like an eternity in the cool hush of the evening, the glow from his dashboard painting erratic patterns on the driveway as he gesticulated emphatically into his phone, his voice rising in clipped tones that carried fragments of phrases like extension on the payments and family resources through the slightly open pane, confirming my earlier suspicions that the debts unearthed in the bank envelope were not isolated oversights, but part of a broader financial quagmire threatening to pull him under and now, by extension, ensnare the very foundation of my independence in this house I had meticulously preserved through years of calculated scrimping and solitary repairs following his father's passing. I remained concealed behind the sheer curtains of my bedroom, my breath shallow as I observed the tension etched into his shoulders, a posture reminiscent of the anxious boy he once was during high school exams. When I would brew chamomile tea to calm his nerves, yet this adult version carried a weight of self-inflicted burdens that my past enabling, through cosign loans and overlooked red flags, had unwittingly amplified, prompting a flicker of self-reproach amid the growing resolve that perhaps those attuned to such family sagas might view my historical leniency as a catalyst for this current impasse rather than mere maternal devotion. Eventually, the engine revved and he drove off into the night, leaving behind a residue of unease that clung to the air like the faint exhaust fumes dissipating under the street lamp, and I retreated to the kitchen to brew my own cup of tea, the steam curling upward as I pondered the tangled web of deceptions now weaving between us, where his bold relocation demand masked not just entitlement, but a desperate bid for salvage, forcing me to confront the dilemma of whether to accelerate my covert consultations with Sarah on the property sale, or risk prolonging the charade in hopes of extracting more truths that could fortify my position. The following morning dawned with a deceptive crispness, sunlight filtering through the maple leaves outside to dapple the breakfast nook where I sipped coffee while reviewing the latest email from Sarah outlining preliminary buyer interest in homes like mine, emphasizing how the post-election economic shifts had spurred a rush among young professionals seeking affordable suburban escapes with established equity, a market dynamic that bolstered my secret momentum even as Mark arrived. Unannounced around noon with Lisa in tow, their arms laden with yet more paraphernalia for the impending takeover, folded linens spilling from laundry baskets and a bulky air purifier Dolores insisted upon for her allergies. Assuming my acquiescence as they commandeered the dining room table to sort through it all, chattering about reallocating storage spaces, as if the deed already bore their names rather than the one I had defended through decades of solo tax filings and maintenance calls. Lisa's presence brought a layer of strained politeness to the intrusion, her attempts at conversation veering toward inquiries about my daily routines and suggestions for accommodating the children's nap schedules, all laced with an undercurrent of apology that did little to mitigate the light frustration simmering within me at the audacity of reshaping my haven into a multi-generational hub without so much as a collaborative discussion. And I responded with measured hospitality, offering iced tea from the pitcher in the fridge while inwardly chuckling at the absurdity of becoming an unwitting curator for their chaos, a situation that evoked those neighborhood tales of overextended parents whispered at block parties where light-hearted jabs about boomerang families masked deeper resentments over lost autonomy. As they unpacked, my eyes snagged on another overlooked piece of mail tucked beneath a stack of kids' artwork, this one a formal summons from a local court regarding liens on Mark's shop equipment, its stark language detailing vendor claims that painted an even grimmer portrait of his fiscal disarray, and I palmed it discreetly during a diversion when Jake knocked over a vase, the shatter providing cover for my sleight of hand as I filed away this latest clue, realizing that his family's migration here served as a multifaceted escape hatch from creditors who might soon descend upon their current address. Seeking clarity amid the mounting deceptions, I ventured next door that afternoon to Marge's impeccably tended garden, where she was pruning roses under the afternoon sun, her sharp eyes and sharper tongue having long made her a repository of local intelligence on everything from zoning changes to personal misfortunes, and overshared slices of her renowned apple pie washed down with herbal infusions. I confided select details of the unfolding drama without revealing my sale intentions, drawing out her observations on Mark's shop woes gleaned from casual encounters at the feed store where suppliers grumbled about delayed remittances and whispers of impending foreclosure circulated like pollen on the wind. Marge's insights, delivered with the wry humor of someone who had navigated her own widowhood by flipping properties for profit, illuminated how Mark's overextension stemmed from risky expansions during the supply chain disruptions of recent years, a narrative that resonated with the broader struggles of small business owners in our community still reeling from inflationary pressures, and her encouragement to stand your ground like I did with my late husband's lazy brother infused me with a tactical edge, even as it stirred the internal conflict of leveraging this knowledge against my son, a choice that might strike observers as strategically sound yet emotionally fraught, prioritizing self-preservation over the unconditional ties I had once idealized. The visit concluded with her pressing a small potted succulent into my hands as a symbol of resilience, its sturdy leaves a tangible reminder that roots could be transplanted without perishing, and I returned home invigorated yet pensive, only to face the real emotional test when Emma and Jake arrived for an unplanned afternoon playdate later that day, their boundless energy transforming the living room into a makeshift fort of cushions and blankets, while Mark and Lisa stepped out for errands, leaving me to supervise amid their queries about why Grandma's house smelled like cookies and promises of permanent sleepovers that tugged at the vestiges of my grandmotherly affections. In that tender interlude, as I helped Emma color a picture of our family under a crayon blue sky and mediated Jake's enthusiastic block constructions that teetered on the edge of collapse, the innocence of their world clashed poignantly with the adult machinations I was orchestrating, prompting a profound dilemma about whether my pursuit of revenge through the impending sale justified the potential disruption to their sense of security. A quandary that might compel those witnessing this internal tug-of-war to question if my hardening stance veered too close to vindictiveness at the expense of the very lineage I had nurtured. The revelation that deepened the intrigue came serendipitously as I retrieved a forgotten sippy cup from the bookshelf, dislodging an old photo album that cascaded to the floor, its pages splaying open to reveal not just faded images of Mark's childhood birthdays, but a concealed envelope bearing my late husband's script, outlining a lesser-known provision in his will that safeguarded the property from encumbrances by dependents without the surviving spouse's consent, a legal nuance I had overlooked in the fog of early grief, but which now shimmered like a strategic ace, hinting at the leverage needed to enforce my autonomy while amplifying the uncertainty of deploying it against blood ties. Tucking the envelope away before the children noticed, I steered the playtime towards snacks in the kitchen, the aroma of fresh-baked muffins masking my racing thoughts. And my micro-revenge materialized that evening when the moving company arrived ahead of schedule for their preliminary load, having miscommunicated the appointment time during a feigned helpful call to the dispatcher. The resulting tower standoff in the driveway leaving Mark red-faced and pacing the porch as haulers idled. With engines humming, their confusion a witty orchestration of delay that bought me precious time to secure the will document in a locked drawer, savoring the subtle satisfaction of turning his presumptions into logistical hurdles without uttering a single rebuke. Yet the day's deceptions culminated in unforeseen tension as the truck finally departed empty-handed due to the mix-up, Mark retreating inside with a scowl to sift through the remaining boxes in the garage, his rummaging growing more frantic until he emerged holding a stray real estate flyer that must have slipped from my purse during the chaos, its bold print advertising quick sales for empty nests. Staring accusingly from his grip as he confronted me in the doorway, the unexpected evidence of my scheming hanging between us like a storm cloud poised to unleash the full force of our entangled lies. Mark's grip on that stray real estate flyer tightened like a vice as he thrust it toward me in the fading light of the garage doorway, the bold headlines proclaiming "Unlock your home's hidden value, fast sales for transitioning lifestyles," glaring up from the glossy paper in a way that shattered the fragile veneer of normalcy I had maintained through the day's orchestrated distractions and playful indulgences with the grandchildren, forcing me to improvise a deflection on the spot while my mind raced through the implications of this premature exposure that could unravel the careful threads of my concealed strategy before the will's protective clause had even been fully leveraged against his presumptuous claims. I snatched the flyer from his hand with a feigned nonchalance, folding it casually into my pocket while launching into an elaborate tale about receiving it unsolicited in the mail from a local agency targeting seniors for downsizing opportunities, emphasizing how I had dismissed it outright as irrelevant to my settled routine of tending the garden and volunteering at the community center. All delivered with a light laugh that masked the pounding of my heart and the internal wry amusement at how his suspicions now mirrored the very deceptions he had woven around his shop's deteriorating finances. He scrutinized my face for tells, his jaw clenching in that familiar stubborn line inherited from his father during heated family debates over holiday plans, and pressed for details about whether I had entertained any thoughts of listing the property amid his family's impending arrival, his tone laced with accusation that I was undermining their fresh start even as the irony hung unspoken between us. Given how my historical support, covering unexpected repair bills for his business or absorbing the emotional toll of his marital ups and downs, had positioned me as the perpetual safety net now being yanked away in this bid for self-reclamation. The confrontation simmered without full eruption as Dolores called from inside for assistance with her evening medications, drawing him away momentarily and granting me a reprieve to retreat to the kitchen where I poured a glass of water with hands that trembled slightly from the adrenaline, reflecting on the deepening chasm this incident had carved into our already strained dynamic, where his entitlement clashed against my burgeoning assertion of boundaries forged in the fires of widowhoods, isolation, and financial prudence over 2 decades of solo stewardship. Over the next couple of days, the household devolved into a tense tableau of partial occupations, with Dolores establishing her domain in the guest room by rearranging furniture to suit her preferences for easy access to the powder room and television remote, her complaints about the threadbare rugs and outdated wallpaper filtering through the walls like persistent drips from a leaky faucet, while Lisa attempted to broker peace through small gestures such as brewing morning coffee strong enough to rival the diner blends we both favored, her whispered apologies conveying an awareness of the imbalance, yet stopping short of challenging Mark's directives. I navigated this intrusion with a surface-level graciousness, assisting in minor tasks like hanging child-proof gates on the cabinets, while inwardly grappling with the light vulgarity of the situation. thoughts drifting to how this gradual encroachment resembled a slow-motion takeover by relatives treating the home like a communal extension of their misfortunes rather than the hard-won refuge it represented for me after years of juggling night shifts at the local factory and correspondence courses to upskill for better pay. Sarah maintained contact through discreet texts updating me on the buyer's due diligence, her messages highlighting favorable inspection reports and the potential for a closing within weeks that aligned perfectly with the market's appetite for turnkey properties appealing to families unburdened by adult children's boomerang returns, bolstering my resolve even as pangs of guilt surfaced during quiet moments when Jake's laughter echoed from the backyard swing set I had installed during Mark's childhood. Driven by a need to solidify my legal footing amid the escalating pressures, I slipped away that Wednesday afternoon to the county clerk's office under the guise of running errands for Dolores's preferred brand of chamomile tea. Navigating the fluorescent-lit aisles of public records where dusty ledgers and digital terminals revealed the intricacies of the property deed intertwined with my husband's will, confirming the clause's robustness in shielding the asset from familial encumbrances. Without explicit spousal approval, a provision born from his prescient concerns during estate planning sessions about over-reliance on family resources post his potential absence. This validation infused me with a tactical confidence, yet it amplified the internal dilemma of whether to wield this knowledge as a merciful warning to Mark, sparing him the full humiliation of eviction-like fallout, or to deploy it strategically in service of the revenge that had crystallized from his initial ultimatum, a choice that weighed heavily as I drove home through the winding suburban lanes lined with homes much like mine, symbols of middle-class perseverance now tested by generational shifts where adult offspring increasingly blurred lines between support and exploitation. The humor in my predicament emerged unexpectedly during preparations for a family barbecue that Saturday, a gathering Mark insisted upon to christen the new arrangement, with neighbors invited for cover, where I took charge of the side dishes in the kitchen, deliberately over-seasoning the coleslaw with a heavy hand on the vinegar to evoke puckered expressions around the picnic table, watching with concealed delight as Mark grimaced through bites while Dolores fanned herself dramatically against the tangy assault, the witty micro-revenge lying in this innocuous sabotage that disrupted their celebratory narrative without drawing suspicion, transforming the event into a comedy of culinary mishaps amid the sizzle of burgers on the grill. That evening's fallout from the barbecue lingered into a pivotal confrontation in the dimly lit garage after the guests departed, where Mark cornered me amid the clutter of half-unpacked boxes and oily tools from his shop, his voice low and urgent as he finally unburdened partial truths about the summons and liens I had discovered, admitting the debts had ballooned from aggressive expansions during supply shortages that never fully abated, framing the move-in as a collective strategy to pool resources and perhaps even renovate for resale value, his eyes pleading for understanding that clashed with the betrayal of concealing these perils while commandeering my space. The revelation struck like a thunderclap, illuminating how his actions stemmed not merely from laziness, but from a spiraling panic he had shielded from me, the woman who had modeled resilience through her own losses, and in that raw exchange, I chose restraint over immediate exposure of the will clause, walking away with a measured admonition about honesty as the foundation of family, a decision that prolonged the uncertainty while intensifying the conflict, as if my selective mercy only deepened the emotional fissures rather than mending them, potentially earning disapproval from those who might see it as prolonging unnecessary pain in favor of dramatic payoff. As the night wore on and the house settled into uneasy quiet, I finalized arrangements with Sarah via a late-night call from my bedroom, her assurance of the buyer's commitment steadying my nerves, but just as I ended the conversation, my phone illuminated with an incoming call from an unfamiliar number, the buyer's representative, their voice brimming with excitement about coordinating the final walkthrough and possession details for the upcoming week, a development that promised to propel the reckoning forward while leaving me teetering on the brink of irreversible action. That unexpected call from the buyer's representative echoed in my ears long after I hung up, Their enthusiastic rundown of the final walkthrough and possession timelines scheduled for the following week serving as an unyielding deadline that sharpened the edges of the fragile peace I had negotiated through selective silences and culinary slights during the barbecue, compelling me to navigate the household's escalating tensions with a heightened vigilance that masked the internal turmoil of balancing maternal instincts against the imperative of reclaiming the autonomy eroded by Mark's presumptuous invasion and the mounting revelations of his financial deceptions. The subsequent days unfolded in a whirlwind of feigned domesticity, with Dolores dominating the living room routines by commandeering the remote for her endless parade of daytime dramas that blared through the walls like unwelcome commentary on our own familial unraveling, while Lisa shuttled the children between playdates and preschool with apologetic glances that hinted at her growing unease over Mark's evasive explanations about the shop's status, leaving me to orchestrate subtle preparations for the transition by quietly packing personal mementos into labeled boxes stored in the attic, each item a faded quilt from my wedding or Mark's baby shoes, evoking a pang of nostalgia intertwined with the wry humor of transforming my sanctuary into a stage for this ironic handover where the very family seeking to claim it would instead witness its departure from our grasp. Sarah's daily check-ins via encrypted texts provided a lifeline of encouragement, detailing how the Byers, a young couple relocating for his engineering job amid the post-election boom in Midwest tech hubs, had waived minor contingencies in their eagerness for the property's spacious layout and mature trees, a market fervor that underscored the value I had cultivated through years of uncelebrated maintenance, yet it also amplified the dilemma gnawing at me about whether to extend a final olive branch to Mark by disclosing the will's clause early, potentially averting a public spectacle that might scar the grandchildren's memories, or to let the full weight of consequence unfold as retribution for his initial dismissal of my voice in the matter, a choice that positioned me perilously close to the archetype of the unforgiving matriarch whose grudges overshadowed legacy. Humor infiltrated the absurdity of the preparations in unexpected ways, such as when I accidentally misplaced Dolores's favorite throw pillow during a mock reorganization of the guest room, watching her huff through the search with exaggerated sighs that drew reluctant chuckles from Lisa and even a suppressed smile from Mark. The light vulgarity of the moment residing in my private satisfaction at these petty disruptions that chipped away at their sense of entitlement without overt conflict. All while I finalized staging touches like neutralizing family photos on the mantle to appeal to the Byers' vision of a blank canvas for their own beginnings. The true emotional undercurrent surged on Tuesday evening during a rare quiet dinner around the oak table scarred from decades of shared meals, where the children chattered about school projects oblivious to the undercurrents, but as plates cleared, I could no longer contain the partial unveiling, sliding the yellowed wool envelope across the surface with deliberate calm, its contents detailing the protective stipulation against dependent encumbrances that invalidated any informal claims on the property without my consent, prompting Mark's fork to clatter against his dish as he scanned the lines, his face paling with the dawning realization that his relocation gambit had been legally undermined from the outset. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Dolores muttered indictments about betrayal from beyond the grave, and the air thickened with Mark's defensive torrent of admissions. The shop's debts had spiraled to six figures from unchecked inventory loans and a botched partnership during the supply crises, framing the move as a desperate consolidation to forestall bankruptcy proceedings that loomed like storm fronts. His voice cracking with a vulnerability that pierced my resolve, revealing how my enabling had intertwined our fates in ways neither had anticipated, yet in that raw exposure, I held back the sails. Finality, choosing a measured rebuke about the erosion of trust over explosive confrontation, a restraint that might invite judgment from observers who saw it as prolonging the agony rather than hastening healing through unvarnished dialogue. The climax erupted the next morning under a crisp autumn sky heavy with the scent of fallen leaves, as Mark's family loaded the last of their belongings into the U-Haul trailer hitched to his truck, his posture rigid with a mix of defiance and dawning dread, while the children waved from the cab with innocent excitement over what they perceived as an adventure. only for the scene to pivot dramatically when I emerged from the front door with my own modest stack of boxes at my feet, the house key extended in my open palm, glinting in the sunlight as the buyer's pristine SUV crested the driveway behind them, the couple stepping out with broad smiles and the realtor trailing with paperwork in hand. "You're late," I stated evenly, my tone laced with the culmination of every suppressed frustration and strategic delay, handing the key to the newcomers who expressed effusive thanks for the smooth process, while Mark's family remained frozen in stunned tableau. The witty satisfaction of the revenge crystallizing in this orchestrated reversal, where the inheritance clause ensured the transaction's ironclad validity, stripping him of any recourse and transforming his firm ultimatum into a humiliating retreat amid the crunch of gravel under retreating tires. Lisa gathered the tearful children close, Dolores clutched her purse like a shield, and Mark's glare bore a complex brew of resentment and reluctant awe at the thoroughness of my counterstroke. The moment stretching taut with unspoken recriminations about paths not taken, my choices to withhold truths for dramatic effect now echoing as potential catalysts for irreparable rifts, even as the buyers unlocked their new chapter inside, oblivious to the familial tempest that had preceded them. In the aftermath, as I loaded my car with the essentials and paused on the curb to watch the U-Haul depart in defeated procession, the neighborhood stirring with curious glances from behind curtains, a profound ambiguity settled over me like the gathering dusk, leaving unanswered the question of whether this clever reclamation of agency had restored my dignity or merely isolated me further in the twilight of life, pondering if Mark's eventual outreach for reconciliation might bridge the chasm, or if the scars of entitlement and withheld mercies would forever redefine our bond, inviting reflection on the delicate balance between justice and forgiveness in families forged through sacrifice and strained by survival.